Peace, peace. This your host, Selah Shalom, and this is the Cosmon Teachings in the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible, Owaspi. And the topic of discussion today is going to be called The Battle of 1,000 Years for Arabinya by Osiris. And these are the origins of the pharaonic age of the pharaohs of Egypt and the kings of Sumer, and the original place of the Hebrews before coming to Kemet. Now here are the conditions of the countries of Persia, Arabinya, Canaan, and Hellas at the time DYUS and his army descended down to the earth to overthrow the worshippers of the Great Spirit, the Creator. And the time period is around 3000 BC. The major civilizations at this time are Kish and Sumer, the city and kings of Ebla in Syria, and in Kemet you have Menes. Now here's the condition of Persia at this time period. Book of Jehovah chapter 21 verse 1 through 11. It states, verse 1, "Thus laid the three great countries, Arabinya, Persia, and Hellas, of which Persia was mightiest, peopled with very giants, lofty bearing men and women, of red, copper colored, and with abundance of long black hair, high in the nose and cheekbones, with determined jaws, and eyes to charm and command. Mostly full-blooded Ahuans, half-breeds between the Ahuans and the burrowers in the ground, the brown people. The Persians were a proud race, built up in great comeliness by the god Apollo. And Apollo, he was the ruler of the 19th arc cycle after the creation of man, and he was sent to beautify the human shape." Now back to the verse. "Whose high-raised office was to fashion the breeds of mortals into noble forms. Foremost in all the world was Persia in all great deeds, and in men of learning, and in ancient wars. It was here great Zarathustra was born and raised for Jehovah's voice, in corporeal words. Here the first great city of the sun was built, Os, whose king aspired to rule all the world, and great riches amongst men were here first tolerated by the gods." So here it states that Persia was the mightiest nation at this time, and this time period is the Urarka period in Sumer. Verse 2, "A strip of Persian land cut between Japheth and India extended to the sea in the far east, but the great body lay to the west, covering the Afghan mountains, still plentiful in lions and tigers and great serpents. In these mountains came the Ahuan hunters to catch lions and tigers to fight in the games, where men often unarmed went into the arena and fought them with their naked hand, choking them to death before applauding multitudes. From these mountains the hunters supplied the private dens of kings and queens with lions, whose duty was to devour thieves and other prisoners according to mortal law." So here it states that certain tribes of men captured lions and tigers and fought them in tournaments and games before the people. Verse 3, "And often these traveling hunters dwell with the sacred little people in the wilderness, the Ions, whom Jehovah had taught to charm even the great serpent and savage lions and tigers to be their friends and worshippers. And herefrom sprang a people called Lycians, who living mostly in the forests, went naked, to whom the Ions taught the secret of charming and secret hand power, who worship Jehovah, owning no man nor God as master, for which the Great Spirit named them shepherd kings, for they ruled over flocks of goats, which supplied them with milk and butter and cheese, and wool for cloth, for crotch clothes, the only covering they wore." So here it shows how that the shepherd kings worship the Creator and serve no gods as their master. And this must have been one of the problems when they entered Kemet, because the Kemites were worshippers of many gods. So these shepherd kings would be at opposition with the Kemites for this reason. Verse 4, "These shepherd kings, the Lycians, lived in peace, wandering about making trinkets, which they often exchanged with the inhabitants of cities and the agricultural regions. 1/4 of the people of Persia were Lycians, who were well guarded by Jehovah's angels, and these were such as DYUS meant to obsess for future use in terrible wars. But the other 3/4 lived in fertile regions of Persia, the lands of which were rich in yielding ample harvests. The cities were filled with mills and factories and colleges and common schools, free for all people to come and learn, and altars and temples of worship and oracle structures made without windows, so Jehovah's angels could come in Sargos and teach his holy doctrine. And Sargos is the ability for the angels to appear before mortals. Besides which were temples and observatories for studying the stars, which were mapped out and named even as their names stand to this day. And next to these were the houses of philosophy in all the cities where great learned men undertook to examine the things of earth, to learn the character and properties thereof, whether of fish or worm or stone, or ores, or iron, silver, gold, copper. They had learned to read its worth and nature, and of things dead no longer living on the earth, and of strange stones, and of skins and bones of animals. Their houses were filled for benefit of students and visitors. It was these that DYUS meant to have his armies possess body and soul for his own glory, knowing that by their researches in such matters for many generations they had strayed away from Jehovah. For such is the rule pertaining to all children begotten of the earth. If the father and mother be on the downward road in unbelief, the child will be born more so. But if on the upward way to glorify and all highest, the child will be holier and wiser than its parents. So here it states that the shepherd kings stem from the land of Persia, and it was these people the Egyptians called Hyksos, but according to historical records, these shepherd kings were no other than Chaldeans from the Akkadian Empire within the regions of Persia and Sumer. Now here is the condition of Hellas, verse 5. In olden times the gods had inspired the Persians to migrate toward the west and inhabit the lands of Hellas, also a country of giants, but less given to rites and ceremonies. And they carried with them 3 languages, the Panic of Japheth, the Vedic of Shem or India, and the Persian. And because they used the same sounds, mostly, but different writing characters, a confused language sprang out of these and was called Phoenish. And the people thus speaking were called Phoenicians. That is to say, we will use the same sounds, but take to our judgment to use whatsoever written character we choose. Hence, Phoenish is the first and oldest of mortal-made languages, and this was styled in heaven the period of the emancipation of mortals from the dictatorship of angels in regard to written signs and characters and words. Jehovah said, in that respect, man on earth hath advanced enough to stand alone. And it was so, for from that time to this, neither Jehovah nor his angels have given any new languages or written characters to mortals. And all languages that have come from that time onward are but combinations and branches, amalgamations and malformations of what existed then on the earth. So here it states that the Phoenician language is the first and oldest man-made language. Prior to this, the language of man was given by the angels. Verse 6. The Helicians were rich in agriculture and in herbs of cattle and goats, both wool goats and hair goats, for it was in this country that the angels first taught man how to breed the goats for hair or for wool, accordingly as he desired. And these people were also mostly worshippers of Jehovah, and had many altars and temples, dwelling in peace and loving righteousness. And these same people who inhabited Hellas migrated from Persia, being as the same as the shepherd kings. Now here's the origin of where the Hebrew stemmed from. Now the Hebrew language stemmed from the Phoenician language, but there is a language in which the Phoenician language may have stemmed from, according to historical records coming from a city called Ebla, which existed during this same time period. The city of Ebla is located in Syria, and the language of the people was called the Ebelite language. Now, the person who discovered this was an Italian by the name of Piolo Matti, something like that. I'll just say Piolo. In 1974 and 1975, they discovered over 15,000 clay tablets. And listen to what he says as they begin to decipher these tablets. His words. The real surprise was the language used in the tablets The scribes also wrote entries in their own language, Ebelite. This proves to be a Northwest Shemitic dialect, showing close links in its grammar and vocabulary with later Biblical Hebrew, Canaanite, and Phoenician, dating at around 2300 BC.